The last thing I remembered from my 22 years of absolute soul-crushing misery was the deafening, metallic shriek of a failing crane. It was a Tuesday. Rain slicked the concrete of the high-rise construction site, making the world look as gray and unforgiving as it felt. Then came the violent, crushing weight of falling iron, a flash of blinding white pain that severed my spine, and finally, a profound, echoing silence. My life before that exact moment hadn't been a life at all. It was a relentless, agonizing marathon of survival. People often throw around the word unfortunate to describe a bad hand in life, but my hand had been dealt from a deck stacked entirely with razor blades. My mother had vanished from the hospital room, the literal second my umbilical cord was cut. Growing up, I quickly realized I couldn't find it in my heart to blame her. Who in their right mind could endure living with my father? He was a walking shadow of a man, hollowed out by a severe gambling addiction and an insatiable, rotting dependency on cheap liquor. He made our cramped, mold-infested apartment a living, breathing hell. Whenever he ran out of money, which was every single week, he turned to the kind of loan sharks who didn't use paperwork. They used iron rods, brass knuckles, and intimidation tactics that left bruises on your very soul. And because I was his blood, I became the collateral. From the moment I turned 18, my existence was reduced to a brutal math equation. How many hours of manual labor equaled another week of keeping my kneecaps intact? I pulled double shifts at glowing, fluorescent convenience stores, spent my nights scraping congealed grease off industrial kitchen fryers, and spent my days hauling heavy sacks of dry cement on construction sites. I worked until my palms were entirely calloused, my knuckles split and bleeding, and my spine felt permanently misaligned. I rationed my meals with terrifying, agonizing precision, mapping out how many days a single pack of instant ramen could last if I only drank the salty broth for lunch and ate the soggy, bloated noodles for dinner. Just when I finally thought I was clearing the horizon, when the principal debt was down to a number I could actually envision paying off before I turned 30, my father stumbled into our room, smelling of sour beer and vomit. His hands were trembling, his eyes bloodshot and vacant. Just one more time, they gave me a clean line of credit. I just need you to sign as the guarantor again. The shouting match that followed was primal. It was the sound of a son completely shattering under the weight of a parent's endless selfishness. I left the apartment in a daze, my chest hollowed out by a rage so hot it felt freezing cold. The next morning I was back on the high-rise scaffolding, my mind so thoroughly consumed by despair that I didn't hear the snapping of the steel cables above me. And that was the pathetic, unceremonious end of my first life. During those miserable 22 years, I had exactly one sanctuary. It wasn't a place, but a story. I was utterly, completely obsessed with a cheesy, cliché web novel called The Silver Crown of St. Jude's. It was a textbook high society, dark academia romance, where two staggeringly wealthy, drop-dead gorgeous male leads fought tooth and nail for the affections of a poor, fiercely independent scholarship girl. I had read and reread that book a million times on my cracked, shattered phone screen, hiding under my thin blanket to escape the shouting in the next room. It was predictable, trashy, and absolutely perfect. But when I opened my eyes after the crane accident, I wasn't in heaven, and I certainly wasn't in hell. I was staring at a smooth, pristine ceiling, listening to the faint rhythmic ticking of a clock across the room. I was tangled in crisp, incredibly heavy silk sheets that smelled faintly of expensive lavender and high-end laundry detergent. The mattress beneath me didn't feel like the lumpy futon I was used to. It felt like a literal cloud. I scrambled out of the bed, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and realized I was in a spacious, incredibly upscale university dorm room. Morning sun poured through a massive floor-to-ceiling window, illuminating sleek designer desks, expensive leather chairs, and high-end tech setups that cost more than my entire life's debt. I stumbled toward the full-length mirror attached to the mahogany wardrobe. Staring back at me wasn't the gaunt, pale, exhausted face of a 22-year-old construction worker. It was a young man of ethereal, aristocratic beauty. He had pale, flawless skin that had clearly never seen a day of hard labor, sharp silver-gray eyes, and perfectly styled ash-blonde hair. I had transmigrated. And not just into any random world, but directly into the pages of the Silver Crown of St. Jude's. There was just one catastrophic catch. I hadn't become the dashing, stoic male lead who gets the girl and inherits a global empire. No, I had woken up in the body of Julian Sterling, the second male lead, the toxic rival, the pathetic, obsessive antagonist who spends the entire novel trying to sabotage the main couple's love. In the original plot, Julian's obsession with the female lead drives him to sheer madness. He picks brutal fights with the male lead, attempts to ruin the girl's reputation out of jealousy, and ultimately forces a catastrophic corporate war between their families. By the final chapter, the male lead utterly dismantles the Sterling conglomerate, stripping Julian of his immense wealth, his elite status, and his very name, leaving him to rot in a squalid, penniless exile. Sitting on the edge of that ridiculously comfortable dorm bed, digesting my new reality, I let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. "Are you out of your damn mind?" I muttered to my reflection, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the silk sheets. Why on earth would I ever chase after a girl and lose all this money? Do you know how hard it is to earn a single dollar? I finally have a bank account with more zeros than a phone number, and the original script wants me to throw it away over a high school crush? Absolutely not. The first week of my transmigration was an absolute blur of pure, unadulterated gluttony and consumerism. I didn't care about the plot, the impending doom, or the university term that was just beginning. I spent money like a man possessed by the ghosts of poverty. I ordered absurdly expensive multi-course catering directly to our dorm suite, filling our small communal table with A5 Wagyu beef, truffle-infused pastas, imported caviar, and delicate French desserts dusted with actual gold leaf. I ate good food until my stomach was completely full, eating just because I finally could, savoring the rich flavors that I had only ever dreamed of in my past life. I bought a diamond-encrusted watch simply because the sapphire blue tint of the watch face caught my eye as I walked past a boutique window. I purchased a sleek, matte black sports car without even checking the sticker price, purely because I found the aerodynamic design pretty. I spent an amount of wealth in 7 days that I wouldn't have been able to earn in 3 lifetimes of hauling cement. Yet, when I checked the Sterling Family Asset Portal on my tablet, the amount I spent didn't even register as a rounding error. It was mere dust to a tycoon like Julian. But the honeymoon phase couldn't last forever. The calendar on my designer desk was ticking down, and reality was fast approaching. The undisputed king of this novel's universe was Tristan Vance. Tristan was the male-led, the sole heir to the Vance Group, a multinational empire that practically owned the country's infrastructure, media, and tech sectors. He and Julian had been bound by a bitter, multi-generational family rivalry since infancy. Growing up in the same claustrophobic elite circles, they had been pitted against each other by their ruthless parents, their peers, and the tabloids. They were mortal enemies long before the female lead was even a blip on the horizon. In high school, the original Julian had been consumed by a toxic inferiority complex. He would pull grueling all-nighters, studying until his nose bled onto his textbooks, just to beat Tristan in the midterm examinations. But no matter how hard Julian tried, Tristan always sat effortlessly at the top of the ranks, his name etched in gold at rank number 1, while Julian was violently forced to look up from rank number 2. This constant, unyielding defeat had deeply infuriated the original Julian, warping his competitive drive into a venomous, lifelong hatred. If I want to keep my money and my skin, I reasoned, pacing around my sprawling bedroom while chewing thoughtfully on a piece of imported dark chocolate, I need to completely rewrite our dynamic. The female-led Harper hadn't even transferred to our university yet. This was the golden window. I need to make friends with Tristan Vance. I need to become his unshakable ally, his biggest cheerleader, so that when the romance plot finally triggers, he looks at me and sees a loyal, harmless golden retriever instead of a romantic rival. The plan was simple: aggressive, unyielding, and slightly unhinged friendliness. The very next day, I ordered an incredibly luxurious, custom-made gourmet meal from a 3-star Michelin restaurant downtown. It was packed into an expensive-looking mahogany bento box, filled with fresh glazed abalone, pan-seared sea bass, and perfectly seasoned saffron rice. I walked straight to Tristan's side of the elite university dorms, navigating the hushed marble hallways until I stood directly in front of his private suite. I took a deep breath, pasted on the brightest, most non-threatening smile I could muster, and knocked. The heavy oak door swung open, and the air temperature in the hallway instantly seemed to drop by 10 degrees. There he was, Tristan Vance. The author of the novel hadn't spared a single adjective describing his looks, but seeing him in the flesh was a completely different, breath-stealing story. He was terrifyingly handsome. He had sharp, perfectly symmetrical features that looked like they had been meticulously chiseled out of black marble by a Renaissance master. His eyes were a piercing, bottomless obsidian, framed by long, dark lashes, and his jet-black hair fell loosely and elegantly across his forehead. He was wearing a simple, wildly expensive black cashmere sweater, but he carried an aura of absolute, crushing power that made my breath catch in my throat. Wow, I thought, my brain briefly short-circuiting at the sheer, ridiculous effect of a main character's halo. He's so handsome it actually makes my heart skip a beat. Tristan looked down at me, his gaze sweeping over my face, calculating and cold, then down to the mahogany box in my hands. His expression was completely blank, but his eyes dripped with icy suspicion. "What do you want, Sterling?" his voice rumbled. It was smooth as aged velvet, but laced with an undeniable lethal warning. "Tristan, my good friend, my wonderful neighbor," I chirped, stepping forward and holding the box out like a peace offering to a volatile god. "I noticed you missed lunch at the faculty lounge today, and since we're classmates and lifelong companions, I had my personal chef prepare this exquisite meal for you. Please, enjoy." Tristan didn't reach for the box. Instead, his eyes narrowed into dangerous predatory slits. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his muscular arms over his chest. "Did you put poison in it?" he asked flatly. I didn't miss a beat. "Poison? Me? Heavens, no!" But to prove my absolute sincerity, I popped the latch of the box, grabbed a pair of custom ivory chopsticks, picked up a thick, succulent piece of glazed abalone, and stuffed it directly into my own mouth. I chewed enthusiastically, humming in exaggerated delight. "See? Perfectly safe. Delicious, actually. You're really missing out if you don't eat it." Tristan stared at me. His obsidian eyes tracked the movement of my jaw as I chewed, analyzing every micro-expression on my face. A flicker of profound confusion crossed his sharp features, a tiny crack in his usual stoic mask, before he snatched the heavy box from my hands and slammed the door right in my face. I stood in the hallway, blinking at the dark wood, but my smile remained wide and triumphant. Step 1 complete. From that day forward, I became Tristan Vance's inescapable shadow. Whenever the university soccer team had a match, I sat right in the front row of the crowded, sweaty bleachers, entirely surrounded by Tristan's massive, screaming fan base of elite heirs and heiresses. When Tristan ran onto the field wearing his number 10 jersey, moving with the lethal grace of a predatory cat, I would stand up on my expensive seat, cupping my hands around my mouth. "Let's go, Tristan! You're the king of the field! Kick it right into the net! Break their ankles!" I would shout at the top of my lungs, completely ignoring the bewildered, horrified stares of the wealthy students around me, who were used to Julian Sterling sneering from the VIP boxes. When the referee blew the final whistle and the match ended, the field was instantly swarmed by students eager to hand Tristan expensive sports drinks, designer towels, and perfumed love letters. I used my sheer, hardened willpower, forged in the fires of construction site brawls, to aggressively wedge my way through the sea of fans. I popped out right in front of a sweating, breathless Tristan, proudly holding out a crystal-clear bottle of imported, artisanal volcanic water. Tristan stopped in his tracks, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his taped hand. He looked down at the bottle, then up at my flushed, smiling face. "Does this have poison in it?" he asked, his usual cynical question cutting through the deafening noise of the stadium. "Of course not. Watch." I twisted the cap off, took a swift, deep gulp of the freezing water, wiped my mouth with the sleeve of my designer jacket, and thrust the bottle back into his large hand. "See? Tested and approved. Drink up, Captain." Tristan stared at the wet rim of the bottle where my lips had just been, his gaze darkening in a heavy, intense way I couldn't quite decipher. Without uttering a single word, he raised the bottle, placed his lips exactly over the invisible mark where mine had been, and drank the entire thing in long, greedy gulps, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply with every swallow. My sudden, bizarre transformation didn't just rattle Tristan, it completely upended my own living situation. My university roommate, Mason, was a wealthy, laid-back guy who usually spent his days playing video games, smoking expensive cigars, and actively avoiding corporate drama. But lately, he had been watching my behavior with escalating horror. One afternoon, as I was carefully packing a golden tin of imported French macarons to take over to Tristan's building, Mason paused his game, turning around in his swivel chair to stare at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. "Julian," Mason said, his voice dripping with deep, genuine concern, "are you feeling okay? Did you hit your head on the steering wheel of that new sports car? Have you been kidnapped and replaced by a clone?" "I've never been better, Mason." "Why do you ask?" I replied breezily, neatly tying a silk ribbon around the pastry tin. "Because you used to spend 3 hours every morning throwing steel darts at a literal photograph of Tristan Vance's face," Mason said, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Last month, you tried to hire a dark web hacker to delete his entire senior thesis from the university mainframe. Now you're baking him treats and cheering for him like a proud stage mom. Didn't you used to absolutely hate his guts?" "Hate is such a strong, ugly word," I said with a dismissive wave of my hand, picking up the tin. "Let's just say I've seen the light. Cooperation is the key to a sustainable corporate future, Mason." But while I was busy trying to smooth things over with my roommate, Tristan was growing increasingly analytical. He wasn't a man who accepted anomalies, he dissected them. A few days later, he cornered me in the quiet, secluded archives section of the university library. He loomed out of the shadows, blocking the only exit between the towering mahogany bookshelves, his massive arms crossed over his broad chest. "Sterling," he said, his voice low, vibrating with a dangerously sharp edge. "Tristan." "What a pleasant coincidence," I smiled, clutching a stack of economic textbooks to my chest and trying to step to the side, but he shifted his weight effortlessly, trapping me flush against the shelf. "Cut the crap, Julian," Tristan muttered, his dark eyes boring hole straight through my skull. "I'm going to ask you this once, and I want a straight answer." He leaned down slightly, his face coming so close I could smell the faint, intoxicating scent of his cedarwood and bergamot cologne. "Did you get diagnosed with a terminal illness? Or else, why would you start eating so much when you used to be obsessed with your diet? Why would you start tipping the janitors and helping the needy when a month ago you wouldn't even look at them? And why would you act so disgustingly sweet with me when you've hated me your entire pathetic life?" I felt a cold bead of sweat break out across the back of my neck. Oh crap, he's way too smart. In the original novel, Julian was constantly on a strict, miserable diet to maintain a lean, razor-sharp model physique, and he treated the lower-income university staff like absolute dirt. My past life habits of eating everything in sight and tipping the janitors generously, because I used to be one of them, had completely blown my cover. I had a spiritual awakening, Tristan," I stammered, placing a dramatic hand over my rapidly beating heart. "I looked in the mirror one morning and realized that life is simply too short for rivalry. I want to be a force for good. I want us to be friends." Tristan didn't move an inch. He just stared at me for a long, agonizing minute, his eyes dropping to trace the frantic flutter of my pulse at the base of my throat. "A spiritual awakening," he repeated softly, a strange, unreadable emotion flickering in his dark, abyssal eyes. "The turning point, the moment the script truly began to snap, occurred on a bleak, rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was making my usual daily pilgrimage to Tristan's dorm room, balancing a warm insulated bag containing a rich, slow-simmered chicken and ginseng soup. When I reached his door and knocked, there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Nothing. I frowned. According to the campus schedule I had meticulously memorized, Tristan had no afternoon lectures, and his car was parked in its usual VIP spot downstairs. I tried the heavy brass doorknob, expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, it clicked and swung open against the dark room. The space inside was completely silent. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn shut, completely blocking out the gray afternoon light. "Tristan?" I called out softly, stepping into the massive suite. I found him in the bedroom, tangled violently in a mess of dark silk sheets. He was lying on his side, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Even from the doorway, I could see the deep, unnatural flush burning across his sharp cheekbones. I dropped the soup onto the nightstand, my heart giving a sharp jolt of alarm, and rushed to his side. I pressed my palm firmly against his forehead and instantly drew it back with a sharp gasp. He was radiating heat like a furnace. He was burning up. "Get out," Tristan growled, his voice incredibly hoarse, his eyelids fluttering open with immense, agonizing effort. He tried to shove my hand away, but his movements were weak, sluggish, and uncoordinated. Don't look at me. Leave. I stood frozen for a second, my mind racing. Then, a specific tragic chapter from the original novel flashed vividly across my memory. It was a brief piece of backstory that the author had dropped to explain Tristan's cold, unyielding personality. Tristan's parents were notoriously wealthy, profoundly distant, and completely absent. Their entire universe revolved around their eldest son, the primary heir to the conglomerate, while Tristan was viewed as nothing more than a spare tire, a backup plan. The novel had described a particular incident when Tristan was just 4 years old. He had contracted a terrifyingly high fever, and he had spent days entirely alone in a massive dark bedroom because his parents had refused to cancel their trip to an overseas corporate gala. They had left him to the care of indifferent maids who didn't bother to check on him. That profound, agonizing childhood neglect had taught Tristan a brutal lesson. Showing vulnerability or weakness was a death sentence. To rely on someone was to invite abandonment. Looking at the flushed, shivering man in front of me, the image of that small, lonely, terrified child from the novel superimposed itself over his sharp features. My heart gave a violent, painful squeeze. I knew what it felt like to be entirely alone in the dark. I couldn't just leave him like this. "Shut up, Tristan," I said, my voice entirely dropping its usual cheerful fake facade, replaced by a firm, no-nonsense tone forged from years of survival. "I told you to go," he muttered, trying to weakly pull the heavy blankets over his head to hide himself. I said, "Shut up." I forced my way onto the edge of his bed, firmly grabbing the blanket and pulling it down to his chest. "You have a dangerously high fever. I am not leaving you alone in a dark room to cook your own brain. Deal with it." Despite his weak, gravelly protests, I invaded his space. I ran to his luxurious marble bathroom, filled a basin with cool water, and grabbed a clean, soft cloth. For the next 5 hours, I sat by his side, taking care of him with a meticulous tenderness he had clearly never experienced in his entire life. I gently wiped the sweat from his face, his neck, and his burning chest. When he shook with violent chills, I piled a clean duvet over him, sitting right beside him on the mattress, gently rubbing his broad shoulders to keep him grounded in reality. Around evening, his fever finally began to break. His breathing slowed, becoming deep and even. He slowly opened his eyes, the chaotic haze of the fever completely gone, replaced by a quiet, intense clarity. He looked at me, at my messy blonde hair, my rolled-up designer sleeves, and the damp cloth resting in my hands. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered, his voice incredibly raw, stripped of all its usual armor. I gave him a soft, deeply tired smile, dipping the cloth back into the cool water. "Because no one should have to endure a fever alone, Tristan. Not even an icy jerk like you. Now stop talking and eat some of this soup." He didn't argue this time. He let me help him sit up against the headboard, and for the first time in our lives, there was an unspoken, fragile truce between us. After that stormy afternoon, everything changed. The hostile, razor-sharp tension that had defined our relationship for years completely evaporated, replaced by something entirely different. Something thick, intense, and deeply confusing. Tristan no longer looked at my food deliveries with icy suspicion. In fact, if I arrived even 10 minutes late, I would find him pacing by his door, waiting for me. But he didn't just take the bento box and close the door anymore. "Sit down," he would command, his large hand wrapping securely around my wrist, pulling me into his lavish dining room. "You're eating with me?" "Oh no, it's fine, Tristan. I already ate a snack. I don't care." "Sit," he would say, physically pushing me into a chair and sliding a plate of food in front of me. He would refuse to take a single bite of his own meal until I had picked up my chopsticks and started eating alongside him, effectively turning my simple deliveries into intimate, daily lunches for two. The change on the university sports field was even more drastic and public. The next time the soccer team played, I stood in my usual spot in the front row, holding my bottle of artisanal water. When the game ended, the usual massive crowd of fans surged forward, creating an impenetrable wall of human bodies between Tristan and the sidelines. In the past, I had to use brute physical force to wedge myself through the crowd. But this time, as soon as the referee blew the final whistle, Tristan completely ignored the frantic waves of the popular cheerleaders and the wealthy heirs holding out luxury towels. He locked his obsidian eyes directly onto me from all the way across the field. He walked with long, purposeful strides right through the crowd. The sea of elite students parted for him in sheer, hushed bewilderment. He stopped directly in front of me, his broad chest heaving as he breathed heavily from the match, sweat dripping from his jawline. He reached out, his long, taped fingers brushing deliberately against mine as he took the water bottle. "First sip," he murmured, his voice a low rumble, holding the bottle back out to me. I flushed slightly, feeling the intense burning eyes of 50 high society students drilling into my back. "Tristan, you don't need me to test it anymore. You know it's not poisoned." A slow, deeply amused smirk spread across his lips. He looked so devastatingly handsome with his hair damp from sweat, and that dark look in his eyes that it made my stomach do a wild, uncontrolled flip. "I don't care." "Take a sip, Julian." I hastily took a small gulp to appease him, my cheeks burning. He immediately took the bottle back, his dark eyes locked onto mine with a terrifying intensity, as he placed his lips precisely over the wet mark I had left, drinking deeply. He didn't look irritated or annoyed by my presence anymore. Instead, whenever I pulled my goofy, overly friendly stunts, he looked intensely amused. His gaze followed me everywhere, filled with a deep, predatory interest that made my skin tingle. One Saturday evening, Mason and I were in our dorm room, deeply embroiled in a vicious, high-stakes match of a popular fighting game. We had been playing for 3 hours straight, fueled by energy drinks and cheap, greasy pizza that I had craved for nostalgia's sake. I was on the verge of a historic victory, my fingers flying across the buttons, but just as I was about to execute the final, match-ending combo, Mason pulled a cheap move, physically snatching my controller right out of my hands. "Hey! You cheating bastard!" I yelled, throwing myself completely across the space between our chairs. I tackled Mason right into his large gaming chair, pinning him down. I was completely straddled over his lap, my knees dug securely into the sides of the chair, my hands frantically clawing at his wrists as I tried to wrench the plastic controller out of his unyielding grip. Mason was laughing hysterically, twisting his body to keep the controller out of my reach. "Get off me, you maniac! A win is a win, Julian. Not when you steal my controller, it isn't." "Give it back," I roared, leaning entirely over his chest, our limbs tangled in a messy, chaotic pile. Right at that exact second, the dorm room door, which we had left unlocked for the pizza delivery guy, was violently thrown open. The heavy wood banged against the interior wall with a resounding crash that rattled the doorframe. The laughter died instantly in Mason's throat, and I froze, my hand still gripped tightly around Mason's wrists, my body hovering over his. Tristan stood in the doorway. He was dressed in a dark, tailored jacket, his hair slightly damp from the evening rain outside. The relaxed, amused expression he usually wore around me these days was completely gone. His face was masked in an expression so dark, so violently possessive, it made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. His obsidian eyes dropped to where I was straddled over Mason's lap, then traveled slowly, lethally, up to my hands gripping Mason's arms. The air in the room instantly turned to sub-zero temperatures. Mason looked up at Tristan, his face turning an ashen pale. He looked utterly terrified, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. Tristan looked like a man who was about to commit a gruesome felony and hire the best lawyers to cover it up. Before either of us could utter a single word of explanation, Tristan stormed into the room. His movements were incredibly fast and terrifyingly precise. He reached down, wrapped his large, powerful hands firmly around my waist, and effortlessly lifted me entirely off Mason's lap, hauling me up as if I weighed absolutely nothing. "Whoa, Tristan, wait," I gasped, as he hoisted me flush against his side, his arm like an iron band around my ribs. Tristan didn't look at me. He threw a single, lethal glare at Mason. His eyes burned with a silent promise of absolute, inescapable destruction. Mason immediately raised his hands in a gesture of pure surrender, sliding down in his chair as if desperately trying to disappear into the floorboards. Without a word, Tristan turned on his heel, carrying me right out of my own dorm room by my waist. It took me nearly an hour of frantic talking, gentle soothing, and promising him on my life that I would never play that specific game with Mason again, to finally lighten his dark, murderous mood. By the time he calmed down, he was lying beside me on his own bed, his hand wrapped tightly around my wrist, absolutely refusing to let me leave his side for the rest of the night. And then the fated day finally arrived, the arrival of the female lead. It happened during a crowded morning lecture in the university's main, sweeping auditorium. I was sitting next to Tristan in our usual reserved row at the back, idly clicking my designer pen, internally agonizing over an upcoming finance paper. Suddenly, the heavy lecture hall doors swung open, and a young woman rushed in. She was sweating and flustered, wearing a simple, worn beige cardigan and carrying a massive stack of heavy library textbooks. The textbook definition of the novel's poor, hard-working, resilient scholarship girl. It was Harper, the female lead of the novel. As she scrambled down the stepped aisle, her foot caught hard on the edge of a stray backpack cord. Thump! She tripped spectacularly, tumbling forward onto the floor. The massive stack of textbooks flew out of her arms, scattering across the polished linoleum floor with a series of loud, echoing crashes. The entire lecture hall fell into a stunned, judgmental silence. Sitting in the back row, my eyes lit up like fireworks. This is it, I thought, my heart racing. Chapter 1, Scene 1, The Fated Meeting. In the original novel, this was the exact moment where Tristan pauses, looks at her clumsy yet endearing nature, and feels the very first undeniable spark of romantic intrigue. He is supposed to walk gracefully down the steps, help her collect her books, and lock eyes with her in a moment of pure slow-motion destiny. I couldn't help the massive, happy smile that spread across my face. My plan was working. The plot was on track. I turned to look at Tristan, waiting eagerly to see him rise from his seat to fulfill his main character duties. But Tristan wasn't looking at Harper. He hadn't even blinked in her direction. Instead, he was staring intensely at me. His brow was furrowed, his jaw clenched, his lips pressed into a thin, unhappy line as he watched the joyful expression blooming on my face. "Why are you smiling so happily?" Tristan asked, his voice low and laced with an icy, dangerous edge that caught me completely off guard. I panicked slightly, trying to get him on track. I reached out and nudged his broad shoulder with my elbow, pointing discreetly down at the aisle where Harper was scrambling to pick up her books. "The scholarship girl? She's really pretty, isn't she? Total 10 out of 10. You should go help her, Tristan. Go on." The moment the enthusiastic words left my mouth, Tristan's eyes darkened to pitch black. He clenched his jaw so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek, his voice dropping to a suffocating, terrifying whisper. "So, you think she's pretty? Panic. Oh crap, I messed up." In the original novel, Julian fought Tristan for her. "He thinks I'm targeting her." No, I mean she's pretty, but she's totally not my type. She's your type. I mean I have absolutely zero interest in women," I babbled, my hands waving frantically. Tristan stared at me for a long, heavy second. Then he finally smirked, the icy tension melting into something far more dangerous. "Is that so?" he murmured, leaning closer. "No interest in women." From that day forward, the novel didn't just deviate from the script. It completely tore it to shreds and set the pieces on fire. The universe kept aggressively trying to trigger the standard romantic plot points between Tristan and Harper, but Tristan kept violently glitching the matrix. A week later, our professor announced a major, semester-defining group project. According to the original plot, the professor was supposed to randomly assign Tristan and Harper to the same pair, forcing them to spend long, tension-filled hours studying together in the library. When the professor called out the names, Tristan was indeed paired with Harper. I sighed in massive relief, sitting across the room. But before the professor could even finish writing the assignments on the whiteboard, Tristan stood up. He walked calmly down the aisle, stood over a terrified, trembling pre-med student who had been assigned to be my partner, and tapped him on the shoulder. "Switch," Tristan commanded flatly. "But Mr. Vance," the professor said. "I don't care what the professor said. You're working with her. I'm working with Julian," Tristan said, his voice leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. The poor student snatched his notebook and fled to the other side of the room. Tristan calmly slid into the seat next to mine, opening his laptop as if nothing had happened. "Tristan, what are you doing?" I whispered furiously, leaning over his keyboard. "You were supposed to work with her. I don't do group projects with strangers," Tristan replied smoothly, not even looking up from his screen as his fingers typed rapidly. "I only work with what's mine." Next came the famous cafe incident. Harper worked a grueling part-time job at a quaint, cozy bakery cafe near the edge of campus. In the novel, Tristan accidentally discovers this, begins visiting the cafe every afternoon, and falls deeply for her charm while watching her work hard. Hoping to force the plot along, I practically dragged Tristan to that specific cafe one afternoon under the guise of craving a sweet snack. We sat at a small corner table, and Harper walked over, wearing her apron and smiling sweetly, as she served us 2 plates of freshly baked strawberry shortcake. I took a large bite of the cake and my eyes rolled back in pure past life, food-deprived bliss. It was incredible. The sponge was light as air, the cream perfectly sweet. Wow, I sighed, happily licking a bit of whipped cream off my silver fork. Harper makes such tasty food. Seriously, if someone confesses to me with such good cooking skills, I would definitely say yes. Don't you think? Clink. The sound of Tristan's fork violently slamming onto his ceramic plate was deafening in the quiet cafe. I looked up. Tristan was staring at me, his expression entirely frozen, his eyes burning with an intense, furious fire. He didn't look at Harper once as she retreated behind the counter. His entire terrifying focus was anchored squarely on my mouth. "We're leaving," Tristan said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "But I haven't finished my—" Tristan stood up abruptly, grabbed my jacket, threw a fistful of high-denomination $100 bills onto the table without even counting them, and physically dragged me out of the cafe by my arm. After that afternoon, whenever I so much as suggested walking down the street where that cafe was located, Tristan would step in front of me, physically blocking my path, glaring at me until I nervously agreed to go somewhere else. Worse, Harper didn't even seem to notice his existence. Whenever he entered a room, she would actively walk the other way, looking entirely uninterested in the brooding billionaire air. The absolute boiling point of this entire madness occurred during the annual university department welcoming party. The event was held in a large, dimly lit VIP lounge downtown, packed with wealthy students, deafening music, and incredibly expensive alcohol. As the night wore on and the champagne flowed, someone suggested a classic dangerous college game, Truth or Dare. A massive circle formed on the plush leather sofas, and a green glass bottle was placed in the center of the heavy mahogany table. In the original novel, this specific party was where the tragic, world-ending war between Julian and Tristan officially turned lethal. The bottle had landed on Julian, who arrogantly chose Dare. The dare was to kiss a person in the room. To publicly humiliate Tristan and mark his territory, the original Julian had marched across the room and forcefully attempted to kiss Harper. This triggered a brutal, bloody fistfight with Tristan, cementing Julian's path to absolute destruction. Remembering this, I had spent the entire afternoon preparing my foolproof countermeasure. I had pulled Mason aside in our dorm, holding up crisp $500 bills. "Mason," I had said with absolute, life-or-death gravity, "tonight during Truth or Dare, if I am forced to kiss someone, I am going to kiss you. It means absolutely nothing. I am just trying to avoid a multi-billion-dollar corporate lawsuit and exile. Do you accept?" Mason had stared at the money, shrugged his shoulders, and snatched it. "For $500 you can dip-kiss me in front of the dean, Julian. I don't care." Now back in the loud lounge, the bottle spun rapidly on the polished wood. It slowed down, clicking past several tense students before its tip pointed directly, unyieldingly at me. "Oh, Sterling, Truth or Dare?" the group president yelled over the music. "Dare!" I shouted confidently. The president grinned wickedly. "I dare you to walk over and give a deep, passionate kiss to the person in this room you think is the most captivating." The crowd cheered loudly, and I saw Harper sitting across the circle, looking visibly uncomfortable and shrinking into her seat. I knew exactly what I had to do. I turned my head, looked directly at Tristan, who was sitting just a few feet away. His large hand was clenched so tightly around his whiskey glass, I thought the crystal would shatter. His posture was incredibly rigid, his eyes locked onto me like a sniper. I gave him a bright, reassuring wink. "See, Tristan?" I thought proudly. "I am a loyal ally. I am not going to touch your future lover. Your girl is completely safe from my villainous clutches." I turned away from Tristan, leaned over the leather sofa, and reached my hand out toward Mason, preparing to plant a quick, harmless, heavily compensated platonic kiss on his cheek to fulfill the dare and save my life. But before my lips could even get within a foot of Mason's face, a firm, unyielding hand clamped down on my wrist. It wasn't painful, but the sheer, sudden gravity of the grip made me freeze entirely. Before I could even protest or turn around, Tristan stepped directly into my space. His tall, broad frame effectively cut off my view of Mason entirely. The casual, drunken warmth of the lounge instantly evaporated into a dead, breathless silence. The music seemed to fade away. Without a word, Tristan's grip slid down my wrist to cup my hand tightly. He pulled me with a quiet, undeniable urgency out of the room, through the heavy double doors, and straight into the dimly lit, concrete fire exit hallway. "Tristan, let go." "What is wrong with you?" I demanded, as we crossed the threshold, the heavy metal door slamming shut behind us, plunging us into a quiet, echoing isolation. He released my hand, but instead of stepping back, he stepped in. He crowded me violently against the cold concrete wall of the stairwell, trapping me by planting his thick forearm flat against the surface right next to my head. He leaned in incredibly close, his broad chest nearly brushing mine, his hot, ragged breath fanning across my face. His obsidian eyes were dark, burning with a restless, chaotic jealousy that made my throat go completely dry. "Tristan, listen to me, you have a massive misunderstanding," I panted, my hands coming up to press against his solid chest, desperately trying to keep some distance between us. "I wasn't going to kiss Harper, I swear to you. I was going to kiss Mason. I was staying away from her. I don't give a damn about her." "I don't give a damn about her either," Tristan snarled, his voice dropping to a low, agonizing baritone that shook me to my very core. He leaned down further, his lips brushing directly against the sensitive shell of my ear. His hot breath sent a violent, terrifying jolt of electricity straight down my spine. "Why the hell were you going to kiss him?" Tristan whispered, his voice thick with a dark, suffocating possessiveness. "If you're kissing anyone tonight, it's me." My heart gave a massive, violent thud, hammering against my ribs so loudly I was absolutely certain he could hear it echoing in the stairwell. A wave of intense boiling heat rushed up my neck, turning my cheeks a bright, burning crimson. My brain completely short-circuited. What did he just say? Before he could close the final inch between our lips, pure panic, the overwhelming, flustered survival instinct kind, took over my body. I ducked right under his extended arm, using the quick reflexes I'd built up from a past life of dodging falling cement bags, and bolted down the fire stairs. I burst through the ground floor exit and didn't stop running until I was locked safely inside my own dorm room, my chest heaving violently as I tried to process the absolute madness that had just happened. That night, my subconscious betrayed me completely. I fell into a deep, feverish sleep, and for the first time in both of my miserable lives, Tristan Vance invaded my dreams. It wasn't a nightmare about corporate ruin or exile. It was something infinitely more terrifying. In the dream, the concrete stairwell was dark, and Tristan's hands weren't just pinning me to the wall. They were sliding under my shirt, his warm, calloused palms sending waves of intense, agonizing pleasure through my body. His dark eyes were filled with a heavy, suffocating lust as his lips trailed down my neck, biting gently at my collarbone. His deep voice echoed in my ears, repeating those same words over and over again on a relentless loop. "If you're kissing anyone tonight, it's me, it's only ever me." I woke up at dawn with a loud gasp, my body completely drenched in a cold sweat, my heart racing like crazy. I pulled the heavy blankets over my face, my cheeks burning with an intense, humiliating blush. I was a 22-year-old virgin who had spent his entire past life working until his bones bled. I had never experienced anything even remotely close to this. My body was acting weird, and my chest felt tight and heavy whenever I pictured his handsome, intense face. I immediately went into survival mode, total and absolute avoidance. For the next week, I became a ghost. I skipped our shared morning lectures, hiding out in the old, humid campus greenhouses among the ferns. I stopped delivering food to his dorm, leaving the bento boxes with his building security guard instead, and fleeing before he could come downstairs. Whenever I saw his tall, commanding figure walking down a campus pathway, I would instantly turn on my heel and sprint in the opposite direction, my heart fluttering uncomfortably in my chest. But the universe, it seemed, was determined to force the original romance novel plot back on track, completely ignoring my massive emotional crisis. While I was busy hiding, I started seeing them. One afternoon, from the high, dusty window of the university library, I saw Tristan standing outside the main college gates. Just as he was walking past, Harper bumped right into him. Her books scattered across the pavement. I braced myself, waiting for him to ignore her like he usually did. But to my utter shock, Tristan paused. He bent down, picked up her books, and handed them back to her. A few days later, I saw them together again in the central courtyard, standing close by a stone bench, deeply embroiled in a quiet, intense conversation. Every time I witnessed these scenes, a strange, terrifying sensation would bloom in the dead center of my chest. It felt like a physical hand was slowly squeezing my heart, twisting it until drawing breath became difficult. It was a sharp, heavy ache, a profound sense of heartbreak that I had never experienced before, not even when my father sold me out. I fiercely shook my head, aggressively rubbing my chest to banish the pain. "This is good," I lied to myself, my voice trembling in the empty library hallway. "This is exactly how it's supposed to be. The main couple is finally coming together. The plot is fixing itself. I am safe. I won't lose my wealth. I won't meet a tragic end. So why does it feel like I'm suffocating?" The fragile tower of cards I had built completely crashed down on a rainy Friday afternoon. I was sitting cross-legged on my bed, staring blankly at an open textbook, but not reading a single word. The heavy silence of the room was suddenly shattered as Mason burst through the door, his face flushed, holding his phone out like a lethal weapon. "Julian," Mason said, his voice entirely breathless. "Did you know about this? Are you aware of what's going on?" I looked up, my chest tightening instantly. "What are you talking about, Mason?" "Tristan and that scholarship girl, Harper," Mason said, stepping forward. "They're officially together. The entire university is losing its mind. Check the online campus forum right now." Mason dropped his phone onto my lap and left the room to answer a frantic call from a fraternity brother. With trembling fingers, I picked up the device. The top pinned post on the university's anonymous forum had over 50,000 views. The headline, written in bold, flashy letters, read, "The campus power couple unlashed, Tristan Vance and Harper Hayes spotted." Beneath the headline was a high-resolution photograph, taken in the shadow-filled, secluded loading dock behind the Culinary Arts Building. The lighting was dim, but the profiles were unmistakable. Tristan was standing incredibly close to Harper. His tall body was leaning over her, his face just inches from hers against the brick wall. From the angle of the photograph, it looked exactly like they were caught in the middle of a deep, passionate, intimate kiss. The text below confirmed that witnesses had seen them meeting in secret behind the lab for the past week. I stared at the image on the screen, and suddenly, a wet, heavy drop fell onto the glass, blurring the pixels. I blinked, completely stunned. I reached up and touched my cheek. My fingertips came away wet. I was crying. Before I could even process what was happening, a violent dam broke inside my chest. Hot, heavy tears began to pour down my face in a relentless stream. I dropped the phone onto the mattress, curling my knees up to my chest and burying my face in my hands. I began to sob uncontrollably, my entire body shaking with the force of my grief. I was furious with myself. I was completely frustrated. Why am I crying? I screamed internally, gripping my blonde hair until it hurt. This is exactly what I wanted. This is the perfect ending. The main couple is together. I am completely out of harm's way, and I get to keep my billions. I survived. So why does my heart feel like it's being torn into a million bloody pieces? Bang. The dorm room door wasn't just opened. It was violently kicked off its latch, slamming against the interior wall with a deafening crash that shook the room. I flinched, gasping, and looked up through my tear-blurred vision. Tristan stood in the doorway. He was completely breathless, his broad chest heaving violently, as if he had sprinted a marathon across the entire sprawling campus. His dark hair was messy from the wind and rain outside, and his eyes were frantic, sweeping across the room until they locked onto my trembling, sobbing form on the bed. Seeing him, a wave of profound, agonizing humiliation washed over me. I frantically turned my face away, using the palms of my hands to aggressively wipe at my wet cheeks, desperately trying to swallow down my sobs. I forced a fake, shaky, incredibly fragile smile onto my trembling lips, absolutely refusing to look him in the eye. "Tristan," I choked out, my voice wavering violently. I saw the campus forum just now. Congratulations, I'm really truly for you and Harper. You two look great together." Before the lie could fully leave my mouth, Tristan crossed the room in 2 massive strides. He threw himself onto the edge of my bed, grabbed my shoulders with his large hands, and forcefully yanked my body around to face him. He reached up with his right hand, his thumb catching firmly under my chin, forcefully tilting my face upward so my swollen, tear-filled silver eyes were anchored directly to his obsidian ones. His face wasn't triumphant or happy. It was filled with a raw, profound, heart-wrenching expression of agony and hurt. His thumb trembled against my hot skin. "Really, Julian?" Tristan whispered, his voice cracking with a desperate emotion I had never heard from him before. "You're happy? So why the hell are you crying then? Why do your actions never match your words when it comes to me?" Looking into his hurt eyes, something inside my soul completely snapped. The months of fear, the trauma of my past life, the exhaustion of trying to follow a stupid script, and the agonizing, crushing weight of my unrequited love collided into a roaring tempest of pure, unadulterated rage. I violently shoved his hands away from my face, scrambling backward onto the mattress, my voice cracking into a raw, painful scream. "You want to know?" Looking, I'm crying, Tristan. I stood on the bed, looking down at him, my chest heaving as more tears poured down my face. "Because it hurts, okay? It hurts. I did everything right. I stayed out of your way. I cheered for you from the bleachers. I tried to be nice, and I tried to push her towards you so you two could have your perfect, fated little novel ending. But seeing you with her, I choked on a violent sob, pressing my trembling hand hard against my chest, right over my racing heart. It's killing me. I hate that it's her. I hate that you're looking at someone else. I hate that I've fallen in love with you when I was just supposed to survive you. Before another syllable could escape my lips, Tristan rose from the bed like a shadow. He reached out, grabbed my waist in an iron grip, and yanked my body down off the mattress, pulling me directly into his hard, unyielding chest. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a soft, comforting kiss. It was an absolute explosion of raw, primitive possessiveness. An unyielding hunger, a violent declaration of ownership that completely stole the air from my lungs. He slammed his lips against mine with a desperate, breathtaking force, his tongue tangling with mine in a fierce, demanding rhythm. One of his large hands slid up into my blonde hair, gripping the roots to tilt my head back, while his other arm locked around my lower back, crushing my body against his as if he wanted to melt our skeletons together. It was a kiss that tasted of rain, of desperation, and of months of repressed, agonizing desire. I whimpered against his mouth, my hands instinctively gripping the fabric of his dark shirt as the world spun completely out of control. My knees went weak, and he held me up effortlessly. When he finally pulled back, just a fraction of an inch to let us breathe, our foreheads were resting together, both of our chests heaving wildly. "Why?" I gasped out, my vision swimming with a new wave of tears. "Why are you doing this to me, Tristan?" Tristan wrapped his arms completely around my torso, burying his face deeply into the crook of my neck, holding me so tightly it felt like he was trying to shield me from the entire universe. "Julian, you absolute idiot!" Tristan breathed out, his hot breath sending shivers down my spine, his voice shaking with a profound emotion. "There is absolutely nothing going on between me and the scholarship girl. There never has been, and there never will be." I blinked, my brain struggling to process the words through the haze of my tears and the lingering heat of his kiss. But the photo? And what about the cafe? Do you remember what you said in her cafe that day?" Tristan asked, pulling back just enough to look directly into my eyes. His hands came up to cup my face with an incredible heartbreaking tenderness, wiping away the tear tracks with his thumbs. "You said that if someone confesses to you with such good cooking skills, you would definitely say yes. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" I stared at him, completely dumbfounded. "What?" A deep, embarrassed flush crept up Tristan's sharp neck, the first time I had ever seen the cold, icy male lead look completely flustered. "I went home that night and tried to cook for you," Tristan confessed softly, looking away for a brief second. "I tried to make that exact same strawberry shortcake. I spent 3 days locked in my kitchen, but I kept burning the cakes, destroying the mixers, and I ended up setting fire to 2 different stoves. I'm a Vance, Julian. I can run a billion-dollar merger with my eyes closed, but I can't bake a single loaf of bread to save my life." He looked back at me, his obsidian eyes burning with an unshakable, absolute certainty. Harper saw me looking through the bakery window in despair. She took pity on me. For the past week, she has been secretly helping me in the culinary lab so I could make something worthy of your taste buds. She was helping me prepare a confession for you. "But the photo on the forum," I cried out. "You two were kissing. A complete misunderstanding," Tristan said, his voice dropping to a fierce, protective growl as he pulled me closer. We were moving heavy crates of baking supplies out of the culinary lab, and she completely lost her footing on the wet gravel. I caught her by the shoulders to stop her from falling backward, and the momentum forced me to lean directly over her for a split second to stabilize us both. Someone snapped a photo from a terrible, malicious angle outside the hedge. He rested his forehead against mine again, his gaze piercing straight through to my soul. "I don't want her, Julian. I have never wanted her. My every action, my every thought, My entire universe has been revolving around you for quite some time now. It's only ever been you. The night that followed that confrontation was a blur of thick, heavy heat, breathless gasps, and raw, whispered confessions of love under the shadow of the dark dorm room. Tristan didn't let me go for a single second. His touch was an unyielding, hungry force, mapping out every inch of my body as if rewriting the very fabric of my existence. Every touch, every deep, possessive movement was a silent promise that he would never let the universe tear us apart. I gave myself to him entirely, shedding the heavy, suffocating armor of my past life's misery in the warmth of his embrace. The next morning, however, the poetic romance of the night met the cold, hard wall of physical reality. The bright morning sun poured through the blinds of Tristan's bedroom. I woke up, groaned, and attempted to roll over to check the time. A sharp, blinding white flash of pure agony shot straight up my spine. My lower back felt like it had been systematically crushed by one of the heavy steamrollers from my old construction site. Ow! Holy mother of! I gasped, collapsing back onto the pillows. Tristan stirred beside me. He looked devastatingly beautiful in the morning light, his dark hair messy, a soft, incredibly satisfied smirk resting on his handsome lips as he reached out a long, muscular arm to pull me back into his broad chest. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured sleepily, pressing a kiss to my bare shoulder. "Get out," I roared, using my remaining upper body strength to grab a heavy down pillow and violently shove it directly into his smug face. I kicked him squarely in the hip, trying to push him out of the massive bed. "Get out of this bed right now. My back is completely broken. I think a literal freight train could have hit me and I'd still be in better shape. Somehow, you are a greater hazard to my physical health than a falling crane. Away with you, you absolute beast." Tristan let out a rich, deep, booming laugh, a sound so full of pure joy it made my heart flutter, despite my intense physical pain. He caught the pillow effortlessly, leaned over, and planted a soft, lingering kiss on my nose before heading to the massive kitchen to fetch me breakfast. We were officially, undeniably together. 2 weeks later, the campus atmosphere had settled into a new, comfortable routine. The forum rumors had been utterly crushed by a terrifying formal press release from the Vance Group's legal team, threatening ruin upon anyone who spread false information about the heir. My relationship with Tristan was now an accepted, revered, and slightly feared fact of university life. It was around that time that I heard the news floating around the department. Harper was leaving the country. Later that afternoon, I spotted her by chance, sitting on the stone ledge of the quiet fountain behind the old humanities building. She was surrounded by a set of sleek, heavy luggage bags, and a folder stamped with the crest of a prestigious, world-renowned university in London. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward. "Harper, hey." She looked up, giving me a warm, genuine smile. "Oh, hey, Julian." I rubbed the back of my neck, a wave of old guilt washing over me as I looked down at my designer shoes. "Do you have a second? I actually have something I've been wanting to say to you. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Harper tilted her head, looking more amused than upset. "Sorry? For what?" According to how things were supposed to go, Tristan was supposed to be with you," I blurted out, feeling ridiculous. "You two were the fated match. I feel like I'm the reason your destiny got completely derailed, and now you're leaving the country because the romance plot failed." Harper didn't look confused by my strange, cryptic talk of destiny and plots. Instead, she let out a soft, beautiful laugh, standing up and smoothing her cardigan. "Julian, what kind of rubbish are you talking about?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "The university in London that I am going abroad to? This specific research fellowship has been my absolute dream since I was 12 years old. I worked myself to the bone, pulling triple shifts and studying until dawn, just to get this acceptance letter." She stepped closer, placing a gentle, reassuring hand on my arm. Her eyes were fiercely independent, shining with a brilliant, unyielding light. "If there is any universe out there where I willingly threw away my lifelong academic dreams and an overseas Ivy League career just to stay in this city and fight over a cold, arrogant billionaire man, then I am profoundly disappointed with the me of that universe." She grinned, patting my shoulder. "You didn't ruin my destiny, Julian. You saved me from a lot of annoying corporate drama. Stay happy with Tristan. He looks at you like you hung the moon. But remember, if he ever treats you wrong, my arms are always open for you. Deal?" I stared at her, a massive, brilliant smile breaking across my face. The last lingering shadow of my transmigration anxiety completely vanished into the afternoon breeze. "Deal," I laughed, shaking her hand warmly. As I walked away from the fountain, I saw a familiar, tall, matte black sports car idling by the curb. Tristan was leaning against the driver's side door, his arms crossed over his chest, his obsidian eyes tracking my movement with that same deep, unyielding devotion. I broke into a run, my heart light and bursting with a profound, beautiful happiness. I didn't care about the original novel anymore. I didn't care about the script. I had rewritten my tragic end, I had kept my wealth, and I had found a love that was real, raw, and entirely ours. I threw myself into his waiting arms, completely ready for whatever chapter came next.